Okay, so back with another one, and continuing a bit of a trend here with yet another horror movie review. Let's look at the trailer.
I need you to listen to me. Something really
So
bad.
Smile 2 is a 2024 release and the sequel to the 2022 film Smile. Again, written and directed by Parker Finn. The film stars Naomi Scott, Rosemarie DeWitt, Lukas Gage, and Kyle Gallner. And it follows Sky Riley, who's about to embark on a new world tour but begins experiencing increasingly terrifying and inexplicable events. Overwhelmed by the escalating horrors and the pressures of fame, Sky is forced to face her dark past to regain control of her life before it spirals out of control. So, we have a sequel to one of the biggest horror movies of 2022, a horror movie which had one of the best marketing campaigns I've seen in recent years. I'm sure everyone is pretty familiar with the concept behind this, and the trailer was very big back in 2022 of just that really terrifying smile. And they got actors and they put them in like baseball games and NBA games, stuff like that, and just had them smiling in the background. Really, really clever marketing ploy on that one. And the marketing seemed to really work. The first film was very successful, if the reviews were a little bit middling. Now, me, myself, I quite liked bits of the first Smile. I thought it was a very interesting concept, and I thought Parker Finn was someone who works really well with creatures and with gore, but it left a little bit to be desired when it came to some substance and maybe some kind of commentary on psychological trauma. But now we have this new sequel, and they've done the same sort of things with the marketing, but this did premiere at Beyond Fest, I believe, and got pretty rave reviews from everyone who saw it there. They called it bigger, they called it better, they called it deeper, and it is. And I'm going to get into why it is all of those things, and obviously remain completely spoiler free. So if we look back at the first film followed a doctor who witnesses a very traumatizing event and then starts seeing this smile creature all around her. And it was kind of at times trying to be this metaphor on grief and PTSD, but not doing near enough. The things that first film did really well were the jump scares are actually very tasteful, and again, they are great here in the sequel. And I say that as someone who doesn't normally like jump scare horror. I think it's a little bit cheap, but when it's earned and when it's done well, it can be really effective. And as I mentioned before, Parker Finn actually has a real talent for working with gore, and this creation of this pretty batshit creature that he's created for this film. And the concept is actually really, really unique. Without going into too much detail, the whole thing is about this creature which latches onto people after they see something traumatic and can only be passed on through someone else seeing something traumatic. And that in and of itself makes the message very much about grief and maybe PTSD with these certain things. But this new film takes it to another level. But let's backpedal and we'll get back to that towards the end of the review. To start off with Parker Finn, in the first film I was very impressed with things he was doing behind the camera in terms of his direction and the movements he was choosing to use. And that is no different here. In fact, it's even more evident. I think this film has one of the best openings of a film that I think I've seen in the last year. Like the first 10 minutes are so good and it's all one shot. And I mean, huge sucker for a good long take over here. But it's so tense and just gets you straight into the action, and it's just great all around. But the real thing Parker Finn has, and the thing he really understands when you're directing a horror film, is if you're going to have jump scares, they cannot be cheap. It can't just be a random loud noise or something moving to the camera really quickly. It has to actually serve a purpose to the story. And I have to say, the jump scares in this film are actually fantastic, even catching me off guard many, many times. He's got this really, really good talent for knowing when you're going to expect it and not really giving it to you, and then hitting you when you've kind of forgotten about it. And that's a really, really good skill to have when you're directing a horror movie. I did kind of go on about that one take in the opening of the film, but there's plenty in this film which he's doing, which is really impressive with the camera, where it's flipping upside down at certain points. There are other long takes throughout the film. The cutting, when he's cutting on movement, it just feels so tight and a lot more accomplished and a lot more polished than it did in the first film. And it really shows that he's definitely developed as a filmmaker since making that first film and coming up to huge success. And obviously the pressure was on for the sequel for him to maybe meet the expectations, but in my opinion, he's actually exceeded them in this case. To move on to the cast, the main attraction here is absolutely Naomi Scott, and there's always just been this thing about actresses in horror movies, or scream queens, for lack of a better word, where they just seem to work really, really well. And when you give an actress a good leading role in these films, they really excel. And this is a frankly, phenomenal performance from an actress whose work I'm not really familiar with. I actually can't name something that I recognize Naomi Scott from, which I don't know what that says about me as someone who watches films, but I know what it says about Naomi Scott, and it just screams that she is fantastic in this film. The performance is so visceral and also at the same time so inward and showy at the same time, and really physical, the things that she has to do in this movie. And I was actually pretty blown away by her performance. I can't really speak too much about the rest of the cast because they're not actually given that much to do. They're kind of just placeholders here and there. We spend the majority of the film with Naomi Scott's character of Sky Riley, and for good reason, because it actually brings more focus to, I think, what the filmmaker is trying to say with this film. And that's where I'll come down to on how this film improves on its predecessor in almost every way. As mentioned, Parker Finn, definitely a really skilled director, but the first film was lacking that kind of substance that it really needed. I gave him credit for creating this kind of mythos and this creature which feeds on grief, and the story he decides to tell here actually does sink into that a little bit, how this could be a representation of PTSD and grief and how someone can cope with it. But the real masterstroke here is who he has decided to focus his story on. The character of Sky Riley could be a sort of Sabrina Carpenter or a Charlie XCX figure, where she is this huge world-renowned pop star before we come into this world. We find out as soon as we meet her that she went through a very traumatic event where she had taken a lot of drugs and alcohol and got in a bad accident. And that's where this creature roots itself inside the trauma and the PTSD of it all. But another great thing that this film does is it's quite multifaceted in the way its theme is explored. Like, one whole message I got from the end of the film, and I did kind of see it coming a little bit, but it didn't make it any less effective, is this is a really, really good commentary on the way we view pop stars and how we don't see the kind of pressure they can be under and their real dark side and what's really going on inside their head. And that, I think, is really clever. The last kind of film I saw that even attempted something like this with a pop star was maybe Vox Lux, which is a film I liked but was definitely flawed. And I have to give it real credit for the pop star route, because it doesn't just have this pop star thing as a placeholder. It really explores it, and we see the songs, we see some incredible performances throughout the film. There's one in particular where the choreography and the cinematography is absolutely outstanding, and it just makes the whole thing that much more believable. There's a real attention to detail in the world that Parker Finn has created here for this horror to kind of sink its teeth into. And then another just great thing that this does, because this is obviously now a franchise, is it's made this world a lot bigger and completely opened up a can of worms for the direction that this franchise could go in moving forward. And I might sound like I'm gushing, this is by no means a perfect film. Some of the dialogue is a little bit hokey here and there. You could say it's maybe 10 minutes too long at points. There is a point where it dragged a little bit, but then there's so many great moments. There's one particular one which happens in Sky's apartment towards the end of the film. That's all I'll say on it, not to spoil it, but it was genuinely one of the scariest scenes I've seen in years. And that's coming from me, someone who watches horror films very often, doesn't normally get scared, but this is one where I was kind of like, ugh, you know? And it's not just this expansion on the theme and having much more substance to the story. He's also brought those really good things from the first film with him, with this great creature and with the gore in it as well. Now, it's not overly gory, but I guess if you don't like blood, this one isn't for you. But the special effects on show are just great. They really fit into the world. They're gross at times as well. And for the horror heads out there, I think you're going to be very pleased with this one all over. And I have to say, for finding the first film quite average, I had a really, really good time with this one. And I didn't really expect to. When I saw that a sequel was announced, I kind of rolled my eyes and went, oh no, you know, another horror franchise is going to hit us in the face. It's going to be like The Conjuring all over again. They're going to take an interesting concept and they're going to beat the dead horse with it. But they really didn't. Parker Finn really just chooses to expand on his own skill set and his own world that he's created. And I'm really glad I went to go and see this film. And I'm also really glad that one of my favorite genres seems to be in a really, really good place at the moment, particularly this year. If we look at the likes of Longlegs or The First Omen or The Substance, and now we have Smile 2 and the success of Terrifier 3. Horror has always been a really safe bet when it comes to box office and stuff like that, but we are getting some really, really great horror films at the moment, and I feel like more people need to appreciate this genre for what it can do, not just for the fun factor or the scare factor, but also for this substance that I've been talking about, which filmmakers can put into their films. and talk about the real human condition. I think it's one of the perfect genres for it, and it's why it's probably my favorite genre. But with that being said, if you're the kind of person that enjoys a bit of a jump scare and you like these kind of explorations of the human psyche and you don't mind a bit of blood, you'll have a really good time with Smile 2. You absolutely do need to see the first film because you'll be pretty lost otherwise, I think. So again, I didn't really actually think I would ever say this, but I really, really recommend Smile 2. It's a great, great time at the theatre. And with that, we come to all the YouTubey bits. So please get involved in the comment section. Have you seen Smile 2? Did you enjoy it? Did you watch the first film and you're excited for the new one? Did you watch the first film and you hated it? Please just get involved, tell me everything. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share the video with your friends, every little helps. As usual, we'll be appearing on the Adlib podcast on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. in Malta or 7:30 p.m. in the UK. You can find us live on the Adlib podcast YouTube channel. I know it can be difficult to tune into a live podcast, but obviously the episodes do end up on the YouTube channel after that, but I do encourage you to join in live because you can send in your comments, we can respond, you can ask questions, and it's all just a little bit of fun if you want to hear 2 to 3 people talk about films for an hour and a half. As for what to expect next, I actually need to make a confession. I've never seen the Terrifier movies, and Terrifier 3 is doing so well. I'm feeling a little bit like I'm getting FOMO a little bit, so I'm going to try and watch both of the Terrifier films over the weekend to hopefully catch Terrifier 3 maybe on Sunday night, but we'll see. But until then, I hope you'd enjoyed this little breakdown of Smile 2 and my little rant about how good horror films are doing, and thank you for watching.